Now I can.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Mrs. Chambers. Yesterday, you gave evidence in the afternoon that ARQ data did not consist of all keystrokes made by a sub-postmaster in a branch. Do you recall?
Yes.
You said that that data was never captured.
Yes.
That was page 160, lines 10 to 13 of the transcript. Before I ask you some questions about that, just by way of background for the call participants, in the closing submissions that the Post Office made in the GLO, the Group Litigation Order trial, the Post Office said this in their written submissions: Fujitsu does have access to a record of keystroke activity. The record must be downloaded from the counter rather than being contained in the events log. The counter log is called the Pock log. And in his Horizon Issues judgment, Mr. Justice Fraser found that the audit data, as he described it, recorded all keystrokes performed in a branch by a sub-postmaster. For those that are following, that's paragraphs 906, 911, subparagraph 1, 911, subparagraph 6, and paragraph 995 of his judgment. That conclusion was reflected in paragraph 15 of the Court of Appeal Criminal Division's judgment in the Hamilton case, paragraph 15 stating, quote, Fujitsu held data called ARQ data, which contained a complete and accurate record of all keystrokes made by a sub-postmaster or an assistant when using Horizon. I want to look at some of the documents that are referred to in support of what the Post Office said in the course of the trial in those submissions. Can we start, please, with poll 403233. Thank you very much. Now, if we just look at the top line of this, we can see that this is a peak 273234. We can see under the progress narrative that it was raised on the 21st of August 2018, so that's 2 years after you left. And then if you see the summary, it says the incident is a failed drop and go top-up. That doesn't matter for present purposes.
Right.
If we go to page 3 of the peak, if we just, look at the bottom of page 2 first so we can see who's writing. It's Joe Harrison. Did Mr. Harrison work with you when you were...
Yes, he did.
In the SSE, thank you.
Yes.
Was he a diagnostician too?
Yes, he was.
He says, this is an instance of, and then he quotes a KEL. Counter 2 did receive the, and then there's a message number, unsuccessful message, but debited the customer, and then he quotes some text to the amount of £30 anyway. As stated in the KEL, this may be an issue with script or a user error. The drop and go scripts are supplied and maintained by ATOS. Therefore, please route calls to ATOS. And then he says this: here are the keystrokes and messages from the counter which might help ATOS. Then if we scroll down and look at those, we can see that he has seemingly cut and pasted into the peak a series of text. And can we look at the cut and paste that has occurred?
Yes.
Can you see the first entry and then the majority of the remaining entries?
Yes.
Refer to a button.
Yes, so this is when the postmaster touches the button on the screen and that moves it then well, you can just see that the button has been pressed as it moves on to another screen.
And when you're talking about the button being pressed, what are you referring to?
A virtual. Have you had the chance to see a post office?
So a tile on
So a tile
the
on
touchpad.
the touchpad, yes. Yeah.
And so where it refers to button, that's referring, is it to tapping a tile on the touchpad?
Yes, or using the associated key on the keyboard. So to that extent, yes, the button presses or the virtual button presses are recorded, but not every single keystroke. So we can't see here that a name has been typed in, or that perhaps a name was typed in and then deleted or anything like that. So perhaps I misunderstood yesterday, but I will still say that not every keystroke is recorded. But for HNGX, not for Legacy Horizon, we did explicitly ask for this extra level of diagnostics, which helped us to see how the user was navigating the system at any point.
So breaking that down, do you remember the example you used yesterday of the £250 versus the £2,500?
Yes.
If the postmaster, this was showing some cash in.
Yeah.
If the postmaster wanted to show that they had received £250 in, and the system in the event showed £2,500 in, would you be able to tell, starting with Horizon Online, that the postmaster press a 2, a 5 and an O, and then return or commit it to the stack or whatever the button was to be pressed, rather than pressing a 2, a 5 and then 2 zeros?
You couldn't see that level of detail. Obviously, that information, whichever it was, would be captured and then stored on the system when the transaction was committed. But then when it's on the system, that would be the number that I am seeing. So I wouldn't be able to tell that at the point it's actually being recorded by the system, it is not precisely what the postmaster had keyed.
So if he said, this system is showing that I was showing a receipt of cash of £2,500, I did not press a 2, a 5 and then 2 zeros, I only pressed a 2, a 5 and a single zero, you wouldn't be able to tell from the keystroke data whether that was accurate or not?
No.
All you would say is the system shows that
Yes.
you pressed a 2, a 5 and 2 zeros,
Yes.
because £2,500 is shown as cash coming in.
And that would also then be shown on the screen to the postmaster. So if he felt that the number was wrong, either because the system was now displaying it to him wrongly or because he'd miskeyed it, then you would expect that to be corrected at that point.
And then breaking it down a little further there, you said that not all keystrokes were auditable.
Yes.
What was the dividing line between those which were and those which were not? So i.e., what level of button was auditable? That's a very imprecise question, but I think you know what I mean.
Yes, I think any of the buttons that controlled the navigation around the system, or where the postmaster, I mean, you can see the examples on here, where the postmaster was given a choice and had to choose yes or no. When they were on the home screen and decided to go into a particular area of code.
When
That's
you
all
tried to go into
included
a particular area of code.
Sorry, yes, when they chose that's inaccurate. When they selected a particular function, for example, postage or bill payment, other things would also be recorded early in the process. If they scanned a barcode, that barcode that had been read would be included in the logs.
So you could see the order in which, the order of events.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes.
you could see the pathway that a sub-postmaster took?
For HNGX, yes. And this was really useful for us for diagnostic purposes, because we were able to see, I mean, we'll see that when we look at some of the specific examples, but we can see, yes, they started to do something and then they used a particular button to move out of it. Perhaps that's not something that would normally happen, but that doesn't mean it's wrong. And so that was very helpful to us for diagnosing these problems, because we could see the perhaps less expected paths that were being taken.
You see 4 entries in, timed at 13:11:31. There is the word or the character string MSG 10800, check parcels and services required. Is that a record of a screen being displayed to the sub-postmaster, essentially a pop-up that was displayed on the screen to the sub-postmaster?
I think it was a question that he was asked at that point by a message on the screen. I can't remember exactly how it would have been displayed.
What other ways of displaying it other than on the screen were there?
Well, sorry, that was the only way.
And so where we see the MSGs on here, the messages, is that a record? I'm calling them pop-ups, but essentially messages displayed on a screen to a sub-postmaster?
Yes.
And again, the same question, were there some such messages that were displayed and not auditable, or were they all auditable in this way?
I can't remember. I think they were all displayed, but I'm not certain. They were not there for audit purposes, if you like. They were there as a diagnostic aid, as I said.
What's the difference?
Audit, I would feel, is something that you would return to later and say, this is precisely what happened and we have captured everything that has happened. This data, although I think it probably does meet those criteria, it wasn't designed with that in mind.
How do you know it wasn't designed with that in mind?
Because I and a colleague asked the development team when we had a meeting when HNGX was being developed, and we said, gosh, it would be really useful for us if we know what buttons were pressed and what messages were displayed.
Was any of this available to you for Legacy Horizon?
Not in the same form at all, no. You could get clues from the messages in the message store, but it wasn't designed, and there was a certain amount of of diagnostic information, I think we discovered yesterday in the audit file. But this was very helpful at this level.
This peak doesn't refer to, Mr. Harrison doesn't refer to what he has cut in to the peak as a Pock log. Is this in fact an extract from a Pock log?
As far as I remember, yes. I don't clearly remember all the file names.
What was a Pock log?
A post office counter log. A file that I think there was one for each day. I think they were possibly kept for a limited time. It might only have been 7 days. I can't remember. They weren't copied off the counter unless we needed to access them. But they were there for diagnostic purposes.
You said they were only kept, you think, for 7 days. Do you mean kept on the counter for 7 days, but available in an archive after that time?
No, they weren't archived.
They were not archived?
No. I can't now remember if it was 7 days they were kept on the counter or if it was a longer period, but it wasn't a very long time, and they were not taken off the counter and stored anywhere else unless somebody in SSC went to get one for diagnostic purposes.
Here, Mr. Harrison is cutting this into the peak on the 21st of August, if we just scroll up.
Yeah.
Yes?
Yes.
And he's referring to events that happened on the 31st of July, so 3 weeks earlier.
More likely then it was a month's worth, but I cannot clearly remember, I'm sorry.
And why was that by design that they were only kept for a limited period?
I imagine so, because obviously they could get fairly big and you didn't want to fill up the counter file store more than you had to.
Were they only available from the counter store and nowhere else?
Yes, they weren't kept anywhere else. Obviously, if somebody had looked at the same branch 2 weeks earlier and happened to have extracted that log, they might have it, but they would only be anywhere else if somebody in SSC had specifically extracted them. Oh, that was the case certainly when I left in 2016. I can't say what might have happened since then, of course.
Can we look secondly, that can come down, thank you, at poll 401835. Thank you. This is a peak 209755. Earlier in time, you'll see that it was opened by Mr. Parker on the 15th of April 2011. The summary doesn't tell us anything 6 lines in from the top. It just gives the branch FAD code. If we look at the second entry, if we scroll down, thank you, we can see what the issue was. Poll has a discrepancy with a postmaster regarding a transaction in Huddersfield for TPOS. What was TPOS?
I don't know.
The branch thought that they were settling the transaction below to debit card, but it has been, quote, automatically settled to cash. Branch thinks that something went wrong with their PIN pad. Debit card transaction declined, but the branch didn't notice. And then some details of the branch are set out. This was not noticed until the next day when they balanced. And they then pulled off a transaction log and noticed that the cash payment, a TFS call for this, was logged on the day after the transaction, and MBSC and HSD both told the PM that it was user error. It has now been raised again via TPOS introduction managers, Fujitsu release managers, etc. To provide a sanity check, please retrieve the counter log for node 7 on this date and see if we can add anything. So in short, an issue had been identified with a sub-postmaster trying to settle a transaction to a debit card, but it had automatically settled to cash.
Yes.
And that was only noticed the following day when the
Yes.
sub-postmaster tried to balance and saw that the matter had been settled to cash.
Yes.
Then if we can scroll down to Mr. Allen's entry, Dave Allen at the foot of the page there. Was he a colleague of yours?
Yes, he was a colleague.
Doing the same work as you?
Yes.
He says, immediately after selecting sell euros, message transaction prompt appears. This states transactions paid for using a debit or credit card will require mandatory ID. I note that this isn't shown in the Pock log for the Huddersfield incident. Subsequently, the clerk selected method of payment of debit card, whereupon a message requests entry of the first 4 digits of the card's PAN, the debit card prefix. After entering the debit card prefix, another message, clerk instructions, appears. This states, do you wish to flag the transaction as suspicious for anti-money laundering purposes? If you select yes, you must also complete the form and the numbers given. The postmaster answered no to this. After entering the customer's name and ID, passport details, the clerk is returned to the home screen, which shows the total due from customer equals £500 as would be expected. At this point, there's nothing to stop the clerk settling to fast cash, even though debit card has been selected earlier in the dialogue. And then the Pock log confirms that fast cash was indeed selected at this point. There's no evidence in the Pock log of any PIN pad interaction at any time during this session. No evidence of any banking dialogue in the counter message log, and no evidence of the session being automatically settled automatically in some way rather than by action of the clerk. The counter logs can't show us whether or not the clerk actually took £500 from the customer in exchange for €540. Conclusion, the clerk selected debit card as the method of payment early in the dialogue, but settled to fast cash at the end of the session. Is this another example of being able to access the buttons pressed and the messages displayed that we saw in the previous peak, albeit Mr. Allen has not cut into his entry on the peak the text that supports what he has said?
Yes, he was using the same type of information from the Pock log to give a narrative to what seems to have happened.
So is it right then that the documents we've looked at show what selections, if I can use that word, a sub-postmaster has made and what messages are displayed to the sub-postmaster in the course of the session that they were engaged in, as opposed to a record of every keystroke made?
Yes, and yet again I'll say this is only for HNGX.
Can we look please at, that can come down, thank you, at an example of where you seemingly have had access to the Pock log, Fujitsu 0008 5913. You'll see that this is a peak dated the 14th of October 2015, if we just scroll down for the first entry, with your name against it. It in fact concerns bug 4, that we're going to look at a little later, the Dalmellington bug. But if we see the summary, just if we scroll up, please. Horizon transaction discrepancies. And if we can skip, please, straight to page 5 of this peak. And if we look in the page 3. Can you see right at the foot of the page that we're looking at here, it says keystrokes, back office, remittances and transfers, delivery, scan your barcode?
Yes.
Can you help us, where is that information from?
I would have got that from the post office counter log.
That's a similar sort of cut and paste by you from the Pock log into this peak?
Yes.
And if we go forward then to page 5.
No, actually, that's not, hang on, that's not me. Because this is still an update that has been put on by...
If we just go back to the foot of page 1.
Yeah, this bit that's highlighted at the moment is information that's either been provided by... It looks like it might have been provided by NBSC.
Look at the foot of page 1. That's where this entry begins, I think.
Yes, so this is information that has either been that has been added by HSD or whatever they were called at this point in time, based on information that they had received from NBSC.
So did MBSC have access to the Pock log then?
No, they must have asked the branch what they had pressed to get into this situation.
And just go back to that entry we were looking at. If you look at the whole entry, that doesn't look like it's the record of a conversation in which a sub-postmaster said what buttons they had pressed. Does it?
I would say yes, it does. They have been asked by the help desk, one of the help desk, specific questions, and that is what they have answered.
And so where it says keystrokes, that's a record of a sub-postmaster saying, is it?
Yes, because those are the buttons that he would press to do this process.
And then if we go forwards, please, to page 5. And go to the bottom half of the page, please. We can see entries from you from the 14th of October onwards.
Yes.
And if we look at the third entry there, timed at 15:35:38, evidence added, and then there's is that a Pock file reference code?
Yes, it is.
And what's that saying that you have done?
I have, by this time, extracted the Pock file for the day from the counter. I have examined it. I made some comments on it which are further up the screen.
Yes.
I have put it through the obfuscation process to make sure that no personal data is visible to unauthorised staff. And then once it was downloaded, it was automatically attached to the Peak.
And do we see the automatic attachment 3 entries, 4 entries on, where there's an underlined entry reading 8th of October at pock.log?
Yes, I've added 2 different logs, one for the 8th of October and one for the 1st of October.
And so if we had the Peak system available to us now, that would be a hyperlink through to those files, would it?
Yes, I don't know if those files underlying files would still exist or if they were deleted after a certain length of time.
But, okay, look at it the other way then. Back in 2015,
Yeah.
if you clicked on those, that would take you through.
Yes.
And so what was the purpose of putting the attachments in this way?
To make that available to fourth line support, who were GDC by this point.
And if we go to the foot of the page, please. The second entry up from the bottom, you say routing to GDC, fourth line support, yeah, to investigate why user was able to press and enter and settle the same rem in basket multiple times. I've not managed to reproduce this. And so, can you tell from that entry, and in the absence of us having the Pock log, the extent of the data that you were able to see?
I was able to see the button presses, and if we could just go up the page a little bit, I did put an update on to say there that I could see from the button presses that enter had been pressed several times.
Yes, if you keep going up.
Yes,
The second entry there at 17:42:11.
yes.
I can see that the clerk pressed enter 4 times.
Yes.
And so, thinking of the division that we made earlier, or the evidence you gave about the division earlier, on what the Pock log data did and did not record, this seems to suggest that delivery receipts were printed and then the clerk just pressed enter 4 times.
That's what the log showed, yes.
So you could see a keystroke.
I could see those keystrokes Yes, yes. You could see and pressing that key would then cause the screen to move to a different screen. So these were navigational keystrokes or in keystrokes in response to messages and so on. You could see. When you were asking yesterday, I thought you were asking about every key that was typed, and certainly that was not all recorded.
So if, in my example of the committing cash to the account earlier of the £2,500 versus the £250, if the clerk, after they had typed £250, had hit enter 4 times, would you be able to see that?
It would depend precisely how it was set up. You might be able to see enter being pressed, but I can't be certain. I don't know.
What, if you can assist us, please, what on this occasion allowed you to see multiple button presses of the same nature?
I can't.
Is it the function being performed?
It's the function being performed. I can't remember what the question was that they were pressing enter in response to. I think it is recorded somewhere. It may be, maybe it was something along the lines of, has the receipt printed properly? They pressed enter for yes, which should then have taken them out of the process, but because there was an error situation, it went backwards and then printed a second delivery receipt. And then they were asked again, has it printed? It had, so they pressed enter for yes. And again, this was an error situation. But they were pressing enter, which should have taken them out of the process, but it wasn't working as it should.
Thank you. That can come down. They're the only questions I ask about that topic from yesterday. Can we go back to where we were last night and explore your contact with sub-postmasters? As we read yesterday in paragraph 212 of your statement, you said that the sub-postmasters were not your clients. If you spoke to a sub-postmaster, did you give them your name?
I'd certainly give them my first name, probably not usually my surname.
And did you give them a means of contacting you?
No.
And why was that?
Because they were not meant to have direct access through to third line support.
How would they get access to you?
They could phone the help desk and ask that a message be passed to me, and that did very occasionally happen.
How very occasionally?
Don't know, 3 or 4 times ever, perhaps.
In the 16 years?
Yeah, yes, it wasn't something that... I mean, the whole point of having a support structure is that you've got the people sort of nearer the bottom who are actually beavering away, resolving the problems and doing the investigations. And I think almost any support system, you have a certain amount of filtering with what direct contact there can be.
Was there a duty or an obligation on you to speak to any sub-postmasters, or was it entirely at your discretion if you thought it might help solve the problem?
It was at my discretion, and I was slightly surprised there didn't seem to be any guidance given on that.
Surprised at who?
Perhaps at the general processes, but you know, I came into a team that was already up and running, working in their way, and when you're doing that, coming in as somebody new, you follow what everybody else is doing.
We saw also yesterday that in paragraph 42, Roman 4 of your statement, you said that the MSU was responsible for liaising with the Post Office via BIMS reports if there were errors which affected counterbalancing.
If there were errors that affected the branch accounts.
Yes.
Or client accounts, bills being paid, information being fed through to those, they covered that area as well, and also banking, transaction discrepancies, not discrepancies, anomalies.
As counterbalancing was your specialist area, did that mean that you had more contact or a greater relationship with the people in MSU than others in the SSE?
No, I think that a lot of the counter calls, calls raised by MSU tended to be shared out amongst the teams, so I think a lot of different people would have had contact with them.
Were the MSU involved in getting the Post Office's approval for inserting or amending data into branch accounts?
We couldn't amend data into branch accounts, and no, they weren't.
You said you couldn't amend branch accounts.
Yes.
What do you mean by that answer?
You couldn't amend data that they had already written. All that we could do was to insert extra corrective transactions in the very few cases where that was seen to be the best thing to do to resolve a system problem that had already happened.
Were MSU involved in getting approval for inserting extra corrective transactions?
No.
Who was your point of liaison, therefore, back to the Post Office to get approval for such corrective amendments?
It went through whatever the particular change control process was at that point, and in practice it would usually be the managers in the service management team who would talk to people at Post Office.
So who was your point of contact then within Fujitsu first?
Well, I would... Obviously, it changed over the years. The formal way of doing it was for me to fill in a form saying what was to be done and so on, and then there were people who had to read that information and sign off that form. In practice, I would probably talk to my manager, a problem manager, one of the customer service managers. It just depended who had been involved with it. But there was a formal sign-off process as well, which would always have included the SSC manager and one of the customer service managers.
How did you find out whether the Post Office had approved the corrective amendments?
That would be added to the OCP, OCR, MSC. I can't remember all the acronyms, but it was part of the formal process that there had to be a name and a sign-off on that. But I was not responsible for actually going and seeking that and making... I just filled in the form to start with, and then other people were in charge of making sure that the correct sign-offs were done before I was then given the authorisation to do a change.
You said yesterday afternoon, right at the end of the session of your evidence, that you knew of cases where the Post Office did not tell a sub-postmaster that their financial data had been altered remotely by somebody within Fujitsu. That's page 207, lines 20 to 24. What was that knowledge based on?
Discussions sometimes along the line of a Post Office going to... I wouldn't necessarily be speaking directly to somebody within Post Office for this, although I know there's one occasion when I did, at least. But there were several occasions where we'd say will you notify the branch or shall we? And they'd say, no, we don't think it's necessary to notify the branch.
Why would they say, or what reason did they give for it not being necessary? Hold on. For saying it's not necessary to notify the branch that their financial data had been altered remotely by somebody within Fujitsu?
That was their decision to make. I don't know why they would make it. I would always have been happier if the branch had been fully informed.
Why would you have been happier if the
because
branch...
I always thought...
Hold on. With the transcriber has to write down what we say, and it's easier if I get the question out and then you answer. Yeah. I'm guilty of it as well, of interrupting you. So did they give any reasons for not wishing to inform the branch that their financial data had been altered remotely?
I've seen it written down in one or two instances, I think, because they didn't want to let the branch know that there had been a system problem.
So deliberately keeping the existence of a Horizon system fault from the sub-postmaster that it affected?
That certainly did happen on some occasions.
Were you uncomfortable with this?
Yes, I was, really. I just felt it would be a lot clearer if everybody, if the branches knew when there had been a problem. If I spoke to a branch and there had been a system problem, then I would say there has been a system problem. One particular instance I can remember where I know the branch wasn't contacted was where, as far as we were aware, the branch didn't know that the problem had happened. It had been brought to our attention because of an entry on the reconciliation report. And so undoing what had been wrongly recorded seemed like the best way forward, and they may well not have been aware that they had a problem in that case.
When you refer to the best way forward, do you mean the open and honest way forwards?
The way to resolve it, perhaps with fewest questions.
Well, did it seem to you that in this respect the Post Office was applying an approach, so far as the sub-postmasters were concerned, of the least said to them, the soonest mended?
I can't speak for Post Office, but I certainly got the feeling they did not want that there were occasions when they didn't particularly want the postmasters to know about problems.
Can we look at some documents, please, starting with FUJ 2014-2197. This is an email sent from you to Gareth Jenkins and Andrew Keel and Mick Peach on the 10th of December 2007.
Yes.
And if we read it together, you say, Gareth, we have a problem with a branch where a single SC line was written for €100, £484, with no settlement. This was in the middle of two RISP transactions, and I suspect it's another oddity in the LFS countercode. Initially, it caused a harvester exception because some of the black box data info was missing, but that was corrected. So has gone to Polmis ? And now the set of transactions for the day don't net to zero, hence on the incomplete summaries report. I don't know what to do about it. As it stands, when they balance, I think they'll have a gain at the branch. If we correct the Pol FS feed so it's net to zero, it will not be in line with the branch, which will probably cause problems in future. this might be a case for writing a corrective message at the counter, but this has not been a popular approach in the past. And then you ask some questions.
Yes.
You say that inserting a message was not a popular approach in the past. Is this a reference to what you were just describing? Or is this a different issue?
This is a reference to Post Office not wanting us to make corrections.
So this is the same issue that we were just discussing?
Yes, this is.
But this isn't a communication between you and the Post Office, it's between Fujitsu and Post Office. This is an internal communication.
Yeah.
Did Post Office's desire not to reveal to sub-postmasters errors in the system have an effect on the extent to which you did insert corrective messages at the counter?
I don't think the alternative to writing the corrective message was doing absolutely nothing. Something had to be done about this particular problem because, as I said, in this case it was going to cause them potentially a gain, and they'd got the sort of equivalent of they would have the equivalent of a, no, would they? Yes, they would have had a receipts and payments mismatch or a non-zero line on their branch trading statement. Sorry, this I'm trying to remember a long way back now.
Yes.
Because they hadn't balanced, there was still an opportunity where a corrective message at the counter to cancel out this incorrect line would have put them in the state that they should have been in. So it seemed worth considering that.
What I'm asking is, it seems that by at least December 2007, the reluctance of the Post Office to reveal to sub-postmasters through the use of corrective action errors in the system was having a chilling effect on you within Fujitsu about your willingness to do it. Would
Yes,
that be fair?
I mean, there's the other position, which is that, writing a corrective message, SSC making changes to counter accounts. You can understand why there was quite a reluctance to give us permission to do that as well.
Why?
Possibly because at some levels it was thought that we didn't have the ability to do that. I don't know. I cannot speak for Post Office.
Can we look, please, at Fujitsu 308 7194? This, I think, is related to the email that we just saw.
Yes.
Just looking at the whole page first, can you describe what this document is?
Sorry, can I have a
Yes, of course.
drink and a cough? This is one of the change procedure documents, so an OCP, which I've filled in what has been proposed, why the change is justified, when it will be done, more details as to precisely what will happen. And then I'd already talked to Gary Blackburn at Post Office about it, so this is obviously after the discussion that I had with Gareth. And then further down we can see that the approval has been sought from Post Office through the formal route, and there will also should also be sign-off by my manager.
Thank you. And so if we just read through it together, write corrective bureau message for, and then the branch code is given. A single message was written in error on the 26th of November, selling $1,000 with no corresponding settlement line. To remove the effects of this message at both the branch and on Pol FS, we will need to insert a new message to negate the effects of the original message. Justification: if the change isn't made in the counter message store before the stock unit's balanced on Wednesday, the branch will have an unexpected gain of £484 or thereabouts, and a receipts and payments mismatch. This gain would have to be resolved at the branch. There'd also be an inconsistency between the branch and Pol FS to be resolved. By correcting the problem locally, the branch may not be aware of the problem, and there will be no inconsistency between the branch and Pol FS. You set out when it's planned for, you set out some extra detail, and then you say the message will include a comment to show it's been inserted to resolve this problem. This will not be visible to the branch. Skipping a paragraph, you say neither the new nor the old message will be included in data sent to Pol FS. So I think this is a record to show that despite the misgivings in the email exchange we looked at earlier, authorization had been given. But you record twice on this document that by doing it this way, the branch will not be aware of the problem, and that the message will not be visible to the branch. Why was it important to record those two things?
Just so it was known that that was the case. It's not saying that none of it would have been visible to the branch. They would have been able, if they'd printed their transaction log, they would have seen the first transaction, and they would also see the equal but opposite transaction. They would see that, but they would not have seen the comment
Who had done it?
of who had done it.
Why was it important to record that the who had done it will not be shown to the sub-postmaster? Why were you writing that on here?
Just in case anybody at some point in the future wanted to know. I just tried to, I wrote down as full a description as I could of what was happening. And so if there was a question at some point, we would know this particular fact.
In writing it, were you giving some reassurance to Pol? Don't worry, this won't be shown to the branch. They won't see what's going on here.
I don't recall that being my intention at the time. I certainly wasn't doing anything to try to specifically hide it from the branch.
Wasn't that the effect of what you were doing, though?
I don't think I could have added anything on that would... Could I have made it obvious to them in some way? I'm not sure.
Wouldn't telling the branch assist them in future?
Yes.
In that if there had been a recurrence that was not picked up, then they might understand better how it had happened.
A recurrence would have been picked up by the same things that picked up this one. They hadn't reported this as a problem already. If it had happened again, it would have been picked up by the same mechanism that picked it up this time.
So are you saying that it's best not to worry them with a fault in the system.
I
Is
wasn't
that it?
making the decision as to whether the branch should be informed or not. But yes, by doing it in this way, maybe I was thinking, oh, good, we can just get it sorted out before they balance. They don't need to be bothered by it.
Did the post... I'm sorry.
That probably, you know, if I'd realised I was going to be questioned about it so long afterwards, I might have possibly made a different decision. But that's the decision I made back in 2007.
Did the post office tell you to undertake this correction in a way that did not reveal this information to the branch?
I don't recall them specifically saying that.
Or did you do it in that way as a matter of choice because you knew that that's what your client would want?
I cannot remember, and I haven't seen any documentation as to whether I had a conversation with Gary Blackburn as to whether he was going to contact the branch about this or not. And I don't know what he said in reply. I think I probably would have asked him that question, but I can't remember.
I mean, it is what we see here, that you undertaking the corrective transaction in a way that does not reveal the way in which the corrective transaction has been undertaken and who has done it to the postmaster, reflect the view that you received from the post office, that it was important not to reveal to sub-postmasters any hint that there were issues with the reliability of Horizon.
I don't think I took this action for that reason.
Albeit the effect of your actions was not to reveal to a sub-postmaster the person and the means by which the corrective action had been undertaken.
That was the result of what happened, given that Post Office chose not to talk to the postmaster.
Can we look, please, at poll 302 3765? This is a peak from the 7th of December 2007. Can you see that?
Yes.
And from the summary, the issue is with a branch, and the branch FAD is given Poll FS incomplete summaries report. You become involved in this later.
Yes.
Can you just recall or explain what an incomplete summaries report is?
Where the transactions which had been for a day for a branch were harvested to be sent on to Poll FS, which was their financial back-end system. If the transactions didn't net to zero, then they would not be sent, and we would have to investigate why there was an issue.
If we go over the page, thank you. We can see, I think you attaching some files, is that right, on the 10th of December?
Yes. This is the same branch as before.
Yes.
Yes.
And we can see on the 11th of December a couple of files or links to files entitled Details of How Poll FS Feed Was Corrected and Correction Made to Counter Message Store. Yes. Are they hyperlinks to documents that,
yes.
that I don't think we had those. But anyway, if we go to the foot of the page, please, and look at Andy Keel's entry. Was he a colleague of yours in SSC?
Yes, he was.
He notes at 17 1946. Worth noting that the branch did not have any issues with the mismatch transactions because this was fixed before they did the roll. The branch is not aware of this, and it's best that the branch is not advised.
Yes.
Okay. Again, is that a further reflection of a culture within the SSC of it's best not telling the branches where such corrective measures are undertaken to their financial data by the SSC?
I think it's just reflecting that in this one specific case, Post Office had said that they did not want to, they were not going to contact the branch.
You said in this one specific case.
Yes.
You said earlier that in your evidence and last night that you were aware of cases where the Post Office did not tell a sub-postmaster that their financial data had been altered remotely by somebody within Fujitsu. You're not suggesting that this was the only example of it, are you? Rather, this is reflective of that wider practice, is it not?
This is the call that I had in mind when giving those answers. Very, very hard to remember now, but I think as time went by, we were aware that Post Office certainly did not always want to tell the branches of faults and so on. But I wouldn't say that this was fixed within SSC. As I've said before, if a branch had raised the problem themselves and we were talking to them and we knew it was a system error, then yes, we would say so.
What explains the difference of approach then?
Because the branch may not have been aware of this issue. It had only been, they hadn't reported it as a problem. It had only been picked up on our internal reports.
Did you feel uncomfortable with this?
Yes, I did. I would, I think I said earlier, I would rather that the branch had been involved in the discussion so they knew what was happening.
Is this another case of you just doing what was common practice and that which your client wished you to do?
I don't think it's that unreasonable to do what your client wishes you to do. As to whether it was common practice, the whole process of making counter corrections was pretty unusual. It was not something that was happening every week, every month. They were very, very few and far between. So this was what our client wanted at the time. Perhaps it was me anticipating what our client might or might not want to do. But personally, I would have been much happier if the branch was aware what was being done.
Did the Post Office ever give any good or substantial or honourable reasons for not wishing for this material to be revealed to the sub-postmaster?
I'm not sure that they gave us our reasoning. It gave us their reasoning in that way, no.
Was it a case then that they were, the reason was the least the sub-postmaster knows about errors in the system, the better?
I think you have to ask Post Office what their thoughts on that are, but would say yes, I did get that impression at times.
And how and from whom did you get that impression at times?
I think possibly once or twice I was on a conference call about a system problem with post office people, and I think I've seen at least one document where it's minuted that they didn't want to give opportunities for fraud if postmasters became aware of certain issues.
Can you just explain how revealing to a sub-postmaster that a corrective action had been made to correct a bug in the system would give an opportunity for a sub-postmaster to commit an offence of fraud?
I wasn't talking about corrective actions there. I was talking more about overall discussion of system problems that had occurred. I don't recall that ever being said. In fact, I'm sure that wasn't ever said in any discussion as to a single corrective action at a branch.
We've seen some evidence that people such as Penelope Thomas, Andrew Dunks, Brian Pinder produced ARQ branch data for the purposes of proceedings. Was there any method to alert them that corrective action had been taken to insert data or extra messages into branches' accounts?
If they had looked at all the peak calls for a branch, they might have seen those, but I don't know if that was part of their process. The OCR, the ARQ data would contain both the original transaction and the corrective transaction at the point at which they were done. If the full unfiltered data was retrieved and inspected, then that would show the comment, for example, that I mentioned was added in this one. Certainly sometimes for counter corrections, and it wasn't done consistently, but often we might use a counter number that didn't exist to make it clear that it was something out of the ordinary, or a username including SSC, again to show that it was something out of the ordinary. That wasn't done on this specific one, and I cannot remember whether that was because I was specifically asked not to, or I was just producing a transaction that was absolutely a mirror image of the one that shouldn't have been there in the first place, and all I did was just change the signs on the values effectively, and I left all the other data in there as it was, but I cannot properly remember my reasoning.
What was the purpose of using a fictitious user name?
To make, well, if it had SSC in it, to make it clear that it was not done by somebody at the branch. And
did you always use SSC, or did you use other fictitious usernames that did not identify the SSC as having made the change?
It would always have been something that was very clear that it, as I say, I can't remember without an example if it would have been something like SSC 999, which would have been a valid username, or something else, but it wouldn't have been Fred 12 or something. It would have been something to draw attention to it, not to try and hide it.
Yes, thank you. So that might be an appropriate moment for the morning break as I move next to some examples of bugs, errors and defects.
Yep, by all means. How long do you think is appropriate? Yeah.
Till past, please, sir.
Yeah, fine.
Thank you. Good morning, sir. Can you continue to see and hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I keep promising to get on to bugs, errors and defects, but I've still got to, in fact, cover something that I rather skipped over, Mrs. Chambers. Can we go back, please, to poll 302 3765? This was the peak that we just looked at about the corrective action.
Yes.
And if we can just look at the foot of page 2, please. We've got the message or the entry by Andrew Keel that we looked at in the morning session at 12th of December 1946.
Yep.
Worth noting the branch did not have any issues with the mismatch transactions because this was fixed before they did the rollover. Branch isn't aware of this, and it's best the branch is not advised. And so is that recording that by the 12th of December the fix had been applied?
I assume so.
Yes.
Yes, I mean, it was in the OCP when it was due to be applied.
Yes. If we just go over the page to an entry that I didn't take you to, your entry on the 14th of December at 16:13:37, you say, as detailed above, the two poll FS incomplete summaries have been resolved. The counter problem which caused the first issue has been corrected by inserting a message into the mega store for the message store for equal but opposite values and quantities as agreed with poll, and then you give the OCP reference.
Yes.
As a result of this corrective action, the net effect on poll FS is 0, and poll FS figures are in line with the branch. Poll miss received both the original message and the corrective message. But then you say this: once the problem was corrected, there should have been no impact on the branch. However, it's been noted that the stock unit of BDC had a loss of £1,000, which was generated after the correction was made. We've already notified Gary Blackburn at poll, email attached. This appears to be a genuine loss at the branch, not a consequence of the problem or correction. So on the 12th or by the 12th of December, the corrective fix had been applied concerning a loss of $1,000. After that correction had been effected, a stock unit showed a loss of $1,000. It was only generated after the correction was made. And you're saying that this appears to be a genuine loss at the branch and nothing to do with the correction?
Yes, I've obviously been thinking about this quite a lot. The loss was only generated when they balanced, so that's why it showed at that point. They hadn't balanced before then. I think my conclusion that it wasn't a consequence of the problem may have been wrong. It wasn't a consequence of the correction. I know that Mr. Justice Fraser considered some of this, and there was, I'm afraid we haven't got the documents in front of us, but his view was that there had been two different corrections done, and one of them was for the wrong amount, and I disagree with that strongly, in that the correction that he thought was for the wrong amount didn't affect the branch accounts at all. That was the correction to the PolFS back-end feed. But, yes, the branch then had a loss in this stock unit. One possibility was that they had done a balance snapshot or something during the week and realised that actually they had got $1,000 more than they expected in that stock unit, and had taken it out of there and put it into the main safe to see what happened. Another is that I'm now wondering if this line that was incorrectly written as a SC, serve customer, should actually have been another of these RISP lines, which was reversing a rem out. And so whether it now, that's, can I get this right? Yes, that would, if it was the case, that would have had this effect. But I agree now, certainly given those circumstances, it would have been far, far better to have talked to the branch at that point to try and work out whether they did have a genuine loss at the end of the day, whether it was something that they then could resolve themselves. I'm not aware that they ever phoned in about it. I don't know if Gary Blackburn, who was aware of this, ever contacted them or checked to see if they did have any lasting problem. But no, it was not as a result of the correction, but it wasn't the state that we wanted to end up in.
On what basis did you, in the light of what you've just said, conclude that this was a genuine loss at the branch?
I don't know. I mean, because I had checked very carefully and I could see that my correction had done precisely what I intended it to, which was to remove this rogue SC line, which should not have been written. It's only now I'm wondering if, when it was written, it should actually have been another RISP line. But I can't prove that at this point. Obviously, if the branch had raised a call saying that they'd got an unexpected loss, what on earth has been going on, then that would have been investigated and followed through. But to the best of my knowledge, they didn't.
Did it occur to you at the time that the amount of the correction, the value of the correction that you had made, was equal to the value of the loss that was now being shown?
Yes, of course it did. Which is why I checked and double-checked and triple-checked.
And therefore there might be a relationship between the two?
Yes.
It isn't what you've just said, though, to put the burden back on the branch, to say they need to complain again, they've got to go through the whole rigmarole of going to NBC again.
They hadn't actually complained at all.
No.
They didn't raise the original call.
Okay, well, they would have to go through a rigmarole for the first time then?
Yes.
Okay, we'll move on. I'm going to ask you about as many of bugs, 1, 2, 3, 4, that can come down, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, 19 and 23, as identified in the appendix to the judgment of Mr. Justice Fraser in the Horizon Issues trial as time allows today, and then I'll revert to the process when we meet again for the Phase 4 evidence. I'm not going to rely on his findings for the purposes of asking you questions, not least because we have more material than was apparently made available to Mr. Justice Fraser. And just so you understand, what I'm going to try to do is firstly seek to understand in general terms what the nature of the relevant bug was in a very high-level summary, then identify the issues that I would like to try and explore with you, then run through the material in chronological order that concerns that bug, and then explore any issues that are left that haven't been addressed. I'm not going to explore the bugs in chronological order, simply do them 1, 2 and following.
Yeah.
Before we get to that, would you agree that not all errors in the Horizon system were caught by the automated processes set up by Fujitsu to detect errors?
Yes.
You tell us in your statement, no need to go there, it's paragraph 41, that from around 2007 a real-time monitoring system was developed by the SSC to alert us to system-wide problems. For example, a large number of debit card transactions failing. This system was tweaked and expanded over the years. What was the name of that system?
The SSC monitor? I can't properly remember.
And who monitored it?
We took it in turns. We had an SSC monitor.
Was that one person a day or a shift? Or?
Yeah, a day.
And who developed it?
I think John Simpkins probably did most of it, but then as if other people had good ideas of how things could be monitored, they got sort of added into it. It was more monitoring of the back-end systems, not the counters themselves, although obviously banking transactions and so on were going all the way through the system.
And when you say monitoring of the back-end systems, are you referring to PolFS there?
No, because
you're referring to Fujitsu's back-end systems.
Fujitsu back-end systems.
And so how did it operate? What was its coverage?
I cannot remember any much detail at all. It was just wherever there was a useful source of information, perhaps, for example, about the number of debit card transactions going through, they would have a response code on them to say if it had been a successful payment or otherwise. We could monitor how many were going through a particular point in the system with some sort of failure error code, and if it exceeded a certain threshold, then it would go red instead of green, and that would encourage somebody to see what was going on.
So it was essentially sort of pattern analysis.
Yeah, for that particular instance.
And can you help us, other than failed debit card transactions, what, if anything, else it picked up?
Banking transactions, which were actually a separate system. I can't now remember the details, I'm sorry.
And there wasn't such a system before 2007? Was that right?
Not sort of trying to pick up problems before anybody had reported to them them to us in some other way, yeah.
But in any event, the system didn't itself proactively identify all bugs, errors and defects?
Not at all, no.
Was Fujitsu essentially reliant on, therefore, a problem occurring within the live estate, causing a discrepancy or a loss, and the sub-postmaster raising it through the MBSE or the Horizon support desk?
We had all the reconciliation reports that ran overnight, so that was the main way of finding financial inconsistencies on the system.
So there was the reconciliation reporting system.
Yes.
Did it nonetheless remain the case that the majority of bugs were picked up through sub-postmaster initiated action?
I mean, obviously there were problems to be investigated throughout the whole system, or the back-end stuff as well, but if we're talking specifically about counterbalancing problems, which were only a very small proportion of the overall calls that we were handling, then I would say it was probably about 50-50 inconsistencies being reported on the reconciliation reports, or branches reporting that they had a problem in a particular area.
You said that counterbalancing was only a small proportion.
Oh, yes.
But it was a very significant issue for the sub-postmaster concerned.
Yes, of
potentially.
course. Yes.
And did you realise that at the time? Did you acknowledge that at the time? That the consequences for a sub-postmaster may be very extreme indeed?
I don't think we, certainly as I think I said yesterday, I didn't realise initially that how the post office sub-postmaster structure worked and that they were financially responsible. Obviously some of the problems would have been at the bigger Crown branches, which Post Office were responsible for. And there was always this huge difficulty in distinguishing between where a problem is caused by something in the system and certainly more than just a possibility that it is caused by some inaccuracy of processing at the branch itself, the user input.
Did you and others in the SSE treat counterbalancing issues any differently because of a recognition that the consequences for a sub-postmaster may be very direct and personal?
I don't think that would mean that we would necessarily give it, sort of put it to the very top of the heap. You could argue that it's actually extremely important that a branch or a whole series of branches can trade. If they're not able to trade, that is also has serious consequences for all of them. If the entire estate can't do banking transactions, that obviously also has a severe impact on the whole estate. And so to some extent, I think those type of problems may have been seen as more important, not more important, but would possibly require faster action than a discrepancy call from a single branch. I mean, I do see now that, yes, I am well aware of the impact that these problems have had. But it was so hard to distinguish between business issues and potential system issues. And we would look for every possible sign of a system issue. But if there wasn't one, without knowing what had actually taken place at the branch, you can't do more.
Would your view have been different as to the relative importance according to bugs, errors and defects that may have affected the ability of the system to continue to trade, i.e. financial issues on the one hand, and issues that may affect the continued employment or suspension, civil proceedings against criminal investigations and criminal proceedings against sub-postmasters on the other? If you had known more about how the Post Office had treated the sub-postmaster contract as meaning that sub-postmasters were responsible for all losses.
Yes, I feel we should perhaps have been warned if the result of us looking at a single call over a single day or whatever was going to could result in action being taken against a postmaster with, I don't know how much extra investigation was ever done.
In the early days, say between 2000 and 2006, did you not realise, therefore, that the conclusions that you reached, the nature of the investigations that you undertook that preceded them, and which you wrote up on a peak, could result in the next day a sub-postmaster being suspended and locked out of their branch?
No, I don't think we did realise that. I assumed there would be a huge amount more investigation and double-checking of the figures and everything else.
Double-checking by whom?
I assumed people in Post Office would be doing that.
Can we turn to bug one, please? The payments and receipts mismatch bug. Can we start with my sort of summary of it? Would you agree with the following summary of the bug? Firstly, it was a Horizon online bug that occurred in 2010.
Yes.
Secondly, it occurred when a sub-postmaster tried to roll over a stock unit with a discrepancy.
Yes.
Thirdly, the system would ask the sub-postmaster if they wanted to transfer the discrepancy to the local suspense account.
Yes.
If the sub-postmaster cancelled the rollover, the discrepancy was zeroed from the local cache, but nothing was written to the branch database.
Yes, I believe that's true.
If the sub-postmaster then tried to roll over, the stock unit would be rolled with the corrupt local cache missing from the discrepancy. Sorry, missing the discrepancy.
Yes.
And that would therefore create a receipts and payments mismatch.
Yes. Although I think that receipts and payments mismatch wasn't actually picked up until the end of the following period.
The issues that I would like to explore with you, please, are firstly why it appears that only significant action was taken in relation to this bug from September 2010 onwards, when firstly the peaks had, in relation to it, had been raised in February 2010. And secondly, Mr. Jenkins appears to have been aware of the bug in May 2010, when he noticed a Windows NT event. And then secondly, what was done to ensure that all branches that may have been affected by the bug had been properly identified.
Right, I've got several things to say in response to that. Firstly, from everything I've seen about this bug, I was not involved in the investigations in September, so really everything I'm going to say is based on what I have read since. I have no memory of it. I haven't seen any evidence that suggests that it did occur before September. I know there were a couple of receipts and payments events which Gareth flagged, and there's an email about that earlier in the year, and there was also at least one other problem that occurred during the HNGX pilot, which was roughly the first 6 months of 2010, but they were different underlying causes, and I'm not aware that this specific problem, which resulted in a receipts and payments mismatch, had been seen or reported before September.
That's a very helpful general answer. Can we look at the material then, the chronology of events? There's about 10 steps in the process that I would like to ask you about, but there are about another 20 steps in the process, but I'm going to ask other witnesses about those, or suggest that they're adequately established through the documents themselves. Can we start, please, with FUJ 308 1064? Can you see that this is peak 0194381?
Yep.
It was opened on the 10th of February 2010.
Yes.
And you can see from the summary, counter APP. What does APP mean?
Application?
Total receipts, £250,016.45. Total payments, £200,016.45. And then if we see from the first entry, that summary is included, so a £50,000 discrepancy. Do you see that?
Yes.
And so this is showing a mismatch, is this right?
Yes.
Between receipts and payment
Yes.
of £50,000?
It's reporting a mismatch.
Yes.
Yes.
Now, I don't think you, as you said, ever became involved in this peak so far as I can see. Is that right?
I can't remember unless I go down.
Yeah, I
further.
mean, if you just, if the operator could just scroll through, please. Thank you, Frankie. You'll see, I think your name doesn't appear on it.
Okay. So it's been sent off to GDC, who are providing fourth line support.
Yep. And if we scroll down, please, I think we can see that your name is not
Yes.
On it.
Okay, I do now remember this. I mean,
this document.
I remember seeing this document before, yes.
And we can see, if we go back up to the top of the first page, that this becomes Kel Ballant TJ 1759Q.
Yes.
We can see that under the All References section, yes?
Yep.
Can we look, please, then, at Kel Ballant J 1759Q? That is poll 302 9425. This was created, we can see, by your colleague John Ballantyne on the 12th of February 2010,
Yes.
and last updated by you on the 17th of May 2011.
Yes.
The way that a Kel is written, you can't actually tell what Mr. Ballantyne originally wrote and what you changed subsequently. Is that right?
You can't see on here, the old ones were kept, but I've no idea if they still exist.
So the text on here, we can't see what was his work and what's your work.
No.
And I don't suppose you now recall what changes you made.
I may recognise some of my
Your style.
style, but I'm not sure.
You'll see that it cross-refers in about the 10th line there back to the peak that we just looked at.
Yes.
Yes? And then if we scroll down, please, it states the problem. This is event is generated when the payments and receipts totals do not match on one of the counterbalancing reports. This indicates a software error or data corruption.
Yes.
And so it continues. This has been caused in the past by, and then three possibilities are set out.
Yes. Yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Mr. Beer, but I've had a message to say that I'm no longer on the screen. I'd just like to assure anybody who's looking that I'm still here, and the problem with me being on the screen is being seen to.
Yes, thank you, sir. We're going to be looking at lots of documents at the moment, so you wouldn't have been seen in any event, because when we look at a document, you disappear.
That's all right then, that's fine.
The solution is set out. SMC, or the counter-eventing team, raise a B priority call and send to the SSC if you see this event, unless it's from a training counter. SSC instances of this error must be investigated. If the error is a result of a new problem, please add the details to the list of the causes above. The branch accounts may need to be corrected. See another Kel for advice on how this has been done for a previous problem. What does, do you understand the branch accounts may need to be corrected mean?
I don't know now, and when I covered this in my witness statement, I hadn't seen the right M Kel. I have now, and it doesn't cast any light on it, so I'm sorry, but I don't know why that's there.
I mean, you made a point in your witness statement, I would need to see right M. We're going to look at the right M Kell
Yeah.
in a moment. So you don't understand what that means?
Unless it's referring to the corrective action that may or may not have been taken for the September bug, where they pressed cancel at a certain point.
Who was this direction to correct the branch accounts addressed to?
It's saying it to SSC, I believe, but I don't think I'm just about certain I did not put that in there. So I'm not entirely clear why it is there.
By what method would they identify which branch accounts needed to be corrected?
Well, once you had a full understanding of the specific problem and its consequences.
And by what method would they correct the branch accounts?
It would depend on the problem and its consequences.
In your witness statement, no need to turn it up, it's paragraph 66, you say Post Office would have been informed of each instance. I'm not sure whether this was via a BIM or some other route. Fujitsu would not have contacted branches directly unless the branch had raised the call in the first place. By that, are you saying that the Post Office would have been made aware of each of the individual cases where this issue affected a sub-postmaster? Or are you saying that the Post Office would be informed that there was a systemic problem?
As I said, when I wrote this section, I was working a little bit blind, given that I had no direct involvement with this. We wouldn't have told Post Office about the office snapshot problem. Actually, they probably were told about it because everything in the pilot was closely monitored. But the office snapshot one there, that was false reporting of a receipts and payments mismatch because it didn't take the transfer into account. Obviously, the stuff that had to be done for the September problem was a major problem, which was all followed through at the time.
Followed through by?
I wasn't involved, but I believe you've got some more documents about it.
So in that passage in your witness statement in which you said Post Office would not have been informed of each instance, would have been involved of each instance, you're not sure whether this was via a BIM report or some other route. Fujitsu wouldn't have contacted the branches directly unless the branch had raised the call in the first place. Is that essentially a reflection of the division of approach that you described to us yesterday, i.e. what determined whether or not you contacted a branch or not?
Yes, I believe so.
I.e. it depended on whether the branch had initiated the issue?
Yes.
Can we turn then to the right J Kell that you said in your witness statement you needed to look at? That's Fujitsu's 308-1608. This is the right M33145J Kell that we saw referred to in the Kell that you had last updated on the 17th of May 2011. You'll see that this Kell is not raised until the 23rd of September 2010.
Yes.
Which is 7.5 months, I hope I've got the maths right on this occasion, since the peak that we were looking at originally of the 10th of...
Yes, but that original peak was the office snapshot problem, not the same problem that happened in September.
The why do you restrict the previous peak to only the office snapshot problem?
I don't. It was originally raised for the office snapshot problem, but then when there were other issues that could cause receipts and payments mismatches, it was useful to include them on there so that somebody subsequently checking that same error message could see what had happened in the past and what was, and I mean, it did say if any new problems come in with this symptom, it will need to be investigated again.
So the sentence that we saw in the Ballant J KEL can't have included originally the cross-reference to this KEL, because this KEL didn't exist at that time when it was written. Okay, we'll come back and look at this KEL in detail in a moment. If we just go back to the chronology then, because this isn't raised until September, I just want to see what had happened in the interim. Can we look at Fujitsu 308-1062, please? This is an email chain, I think all dated the 6th of May, certainly the part that I wanted to refer to. And if we look at the bottom of the page, please. Thank you. If we just scroll up so we can see who it's from and to. Thank you. It's from Mr. Jenkins to you on the 6th of May 2010, yes?
Yes.
With the subject line of receipts and payments mismatches.
Yes.
He says that he's noticed NT counter events which look like receipts and payments mismatches.
Yes.
Yes? Why was he emailing you?
Because I was a useful person who would know what was going on in SSC and could check whether calls have been raised for them.
Sorry, could check.
Whether a peak call had been raised for these two instances.
And why would Mr. Jenkins contact you in particular rather than the other 24?
Because I was a helpful person.
More helpful than anyone else?
Probably.
Okay. And he continues, John, and who's that?
John Hume, who was, I think, in charge of the counter development team at that point.
That there were also raised from the office snapshot erroneously. I think that, should that read that these were also raised from the office snapshot erroneously?
Probably.
But that peak and a number has been given was fixed in a fixed code which should be live.
Yes.
Have you been made aware of these or had any calls? I don't know if there's a KEL for SMC to pick up any such events and raise calls. There certainly ought to be. Can you help us? What is an NT counter event?
When the counter application would check at various points at the end of the balancing process to make sure that receipts and payments were equal, and if they weren't, it would flag that in various ways. One of the ways it flagged it was by creating an NT counter event, which would be written to the application event log, which was one of the files we were talking about yesterday. Actually, no, now we're on HNGX. It was very slightly different with the file that had the events in, I think. But anyway, it's the same sort of thing. And these events would have gone from the counter through the Tivoli stream to be, hopefully, to be monitored for and checked by the SMC, whose job was to look for these sort of events or any other unexpected events.
Mr. Jenkins, says in his last line there that he doesn't know if there's a KEL to pick up such events and raise calls. Now, there was, of course, a KEL.
Yes.
We know that there was the KEL Ballant at J1759Q. Why would Mr. Jenkins not know about a KEL that had been in existence by my calculations 3 months by that time?
His job was not support. He didn't necessarily use the KEL system. He wasn't responsible for raising them or particularly using them.
What was the development team's access rights to KELs?
He wasn't, strictly speaking, part of the development team, but yes, the development team had access to the KELs.
What was Mr. Jenkins' access rights to the KELs?
I don't know I can't now remember whether he did have access to them or I think whether he, it was just easier to ask me probably.
He speaks essentially of a system being made or needed to raise calls. What's that a reference to?
Well, part of the process of looking out for this type of error was that SMC were meant to be monitoring for this type of error, and once if they saw one, then they should raise a call. It wasn't Power Help by then, but whatever it was, which would then get passed on to Peak for SSC to investigate.
At the top of the page, you reply, copying Mr. Parker in. You say, Gareth, there is a KEL, and you give the reference, which tells the SMC to raise a call if they see this event. I haven't noticed any calls, but I haven't been doing that sort of call recently. I do have a postmaster raised call from a few weeks back, which I need to look at. The mismatch was only for a few pence, so it's gone to the back of the heap. Was there a heap,
Yes.
i.e. a mountain of unresolved systems issues that you had to work your way through?
Yes, we were very, very busy at this time during the HNGX pilot. HNGX was being used at about, I can't remember if it was 250 or 500 branches. And as you'd expect for any new system, despite having gone through very expensive testing, once you let several hundred branches have a try, they found paths that couldn't have been gone through during the test process. So I can't remember what other sort of call I had been doing, but yes, I had been busy. The postmaster raised call, I think I say in my witness statement, I shouldn't have left it that long, even if it was only for a few pence, but it would have been, the effect on the branch wasn't significant, but it definitely needed looking at, and it hadn't just been closed down, it was waiting.
Were any of these receipts and payments mismatches picked up by the reconciliation process?
No, because the events were now being used instead of the reconciliation process for this specific type of error.
But on this occasion, it was a postmaster who had raised the mismatch, not the NT events.
The call that was on my stack, which I have no memory of now and haven't had sight of, was raised by the postmaster, yes.
And was that the case that even though Fujitsu systems were supposed to pick up things like this, errors were often flagged for the first time by a sub-postmaster?
No, I don't think that is usual. I mean, I don't know now whether there had been a SMC raised call for that call that was on my stack, which hadn't then been linked with it. I haven't got that information.
Can we move forwards, please, and look at Peak PCO 203864, which is at Fujitsu 0008 1586. If you see, this was a peak raised on the 2nd of September 2010. And it concerns a mismatch of a smaller amount of money, £11.20.
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Can we turn, please, to page 2 and look at your entry for 1852.00?
Yes.
You say, Joe, this is important because it means their accounts don't net to zero due to some sort of system error, not user error, similar to receipts and payments mismatch. Garrett had a call about a problem with incomplete summaries recently. Worth checking whether that was the same branch.
Yes.
And what are you referring to there?
You mean the problem with incomplete summaries?
Yes.
That was this reconciliation report which reported on any branches where the day's transactions didn't net to zero. So the branch, if it was the same branch, they might have had that problem one day, and then at some point in the future, when they did their balancing and produced their branch trading statement, then this situation that this call is about, with the trading position not being zero, would be reported. And I can't remember if that was on one of the reconciliation reports or if it was an event again.
Did you think here is a version of the payments and mismatch bug that we saw earlier in the year doing its work again?
No, I don't think so, because I thought we're missing some evidence here. The earlier problems, we know about the wrongly reported one during the office snapshot. Nobody has shown me the peaks that were subsequently raised for those two events that Gareth reported. I'm absolutely certain that him having flagged it up, that would have been followed up on pretty quickly. But we haven't got those calls for me to look at to give you any explanation of. So as far as I was concerned, when I saw this call coming in, I found it alarming, not because I knew there was already a problem in this area, but because it looked like there might be something new. At this point, September 2010, the rollout of HNGX to the entire estate was in progress. I'm not sure how far through it had got. But now, instead of a few hundred branches, we're now probably onto several thousand branches with the opportunity to find some new error paths and so on. So I was obviously concerned that, yeah, we've got a problem here. And it wasn't because I knew of existing problems. I thought it was quite likely there was a new problem.
Can we go then to the KEL that we looked at earlier, Fujitsu 0008 1608? Looking at the top, thank you. We can see that it was raised by Mr. Wright on the 23rd of September 2010, but was last updated by Cheryl Card on the 1st of April 2016, both SSC members, is that right?
Yes, and there have been 10 versions of it.
Yes. And we're looking at the the 10th version. It describes the receipts and payments mismatch bug rather well, so if you can just read it together under symptoms. When a clerk balances a stock unit, the rollover screen is eventually displayed, and the clerk then presses the review or print button to produce the trial balance. The counter then returns to the rollover screen. Having checked the report, the clerk then presses the rollover button, and in normal circumstances is given the choice of rolling to a new balance period or a new trading period. If the clerk chooses to roll to a new trading period, the net discrepancies are present. Then the system asks whether the clerk wishes to transfer the net discrepancy to local suspense or else cancel the rollover. If the clerk presses cancel, the system returns to the rollover screen, and he or she can press print or preview or rollover or cancel back to the stock balancing menu. And then there's a reference to another KEL. If we read the solution at the foot of the page. A reference data fix was released in November 2010 under a peak and the numbers given. Now that the fix has been deployed, if cancel is pressed on a message numbers given, then the discrepancy is not cleared. A workaround prior to fix, if the clerk presses cancel, message numbers given, then to avoid the bug, they must press cancel again to return to the stock balancing menu. Unfortunately, the workaround cannot be done after the problem has occurred at the office, ! In this case, the branch accounts will need to be corrected. Please advise branches to continue rolling over stock units and the office as normal. It is not necessary to wait for the correction to be applied before rolling into a new TP.
Yes.
The workaround suggests, is this right, that was applied in the period before November 2010, before the fix was released?
The workaround is really just saying which button the clerk would need to press to avoid the problem. You didn't read through the problem section on
Yes.
the screen, which is actually where it describes the sequence of button presses that got you into this situation. But yeah, the workaround was no good unless you were very well aware of what was going to happen.
And so it's not really a workaround at all, is
No.
it?
No.
Because it couldn't be done after the problem had actually occurred.
No,
So it's not a workaround at all.
it's not a workaround, no.
And that's because it will always be the case that the problem would come to light after the occurrence in the office.
Yes.
And so is this right? Until the fix was applied, Fujitsu were relying on sub-postmasters to call in. That was essentially the only step that was being taken. There was nothing proactive done.
I cannot remember, I wasn't involved, but I think in all the various documents that we've seen, there was a lot of talk between Fujitsu and Post Office as to how to sort this out, to resolve any discrepancies. In fact, in this case, the branches were losing their discrepancies. So if they'd made a loss, this actually lost their loss. If they'd made a gain, they lost that as well. But I believe, but it's in a lot of this other documentation somewhere, that steps were taken by Fujitsu to find all occurrences of this problem, and then with Post Office to decide what to do about them.
But what about this? As you rightly said, the problem section of this KEL describes a sequence of button presses by a sub-postmaster resulting in this receipts and payments mismatch, yes?
Yes.
What about sending a notice out to all sub-postmasters saying, we've got a bug in our system, don't cancel rollovers when you've got a discrepancy? because it will cause a receipts and payments mismatch.
Yes.
A bit like a sort of product safety recall or a warning notice to everyone that's using a system. We've got something wrong with our system. Don't do this, otherwise it will cause an issue.
That would have possibly caused more confusion at 12,000 branches than the problems caused at the, I can't remember how many it was, but I think it was fewer than 100 that were actually affected by the problem. But yes, that would be something to consider doing, but that would be up to Post Office to communicate to the branches.
Was that, were you ever aware of such a discussion occurring in relation to this issue, this bug, or any other bug? Let's tell people, relatively simple on this occasion, don't cancel rollovers when you've got a discrepancy.
That would cause more confusion because they would not want to roll over with a discrepancy that they disagreed with. So you would have to word it very carefully. And there was a way of them cancelling. It was just a very specific point that they had to not continue to avoid the, or sorry, not cancel to avoid the problem. It wasn't the only way they had of backing out of the process.
What
sorry,
about
but to get to your
the
question,
broader issue?
Yeah.
Accepting that there's a problem with
Yeah.
the system and telling the sub-postmaster community about it.
Yes, I cannot definitely remember. That would not have been up to Fujitsu to make that decision. We had no means of communicating directly with all the sub-postmasters. Post Office could send messages that would appear on the screen at the start of day, but that was totally within their control as to what they wanted to communicate with their postmasters.
I'm not suggesting, let me be clear, that this should have been something that Fujitsu took on itself to do. It was a service provider to a client. I'm asking whether you were aware in your 16 years of ever any discussion about that occurring, rather than correcting things behind the scenes and not telling sub-postmasters about them. We actually say there's a bug in the system.
I can't remember. I wasn't usually involved at discussions at that sort of level for problems that would affect a significant number of branches.
In your witness statement, paragraph 54, you say, I'm asked whether there were any written or unwritten practices, policies or procedures to restrict what information about a bug or potential bug could or would be shared with others, either for limited periods or indefinitely. I was not aware of any such. If I spoke to a postmaster about a problem and I identified it had been caused by a system error, I would say so. Again, the revelation to a sub-postmaster of a system issue was dependent on you speaking directly to the sub-postmaster.
Yes.
And I think you told us earlier that that happened very infrequently in your 16 years.
No, I said what happened very infrequently was making corrections to the branch financial data. I certainly would have spoken to postmasters most weeks, perhaps not quite as often as that. It would depend on the sort of calls that I was handling. But yes, it wasn't that unusual to speak to a postmaster. It wouldn't always be to say there's a system problem, because sometimes I would be speaking to them for some other reason.
Was there any guidance or policy on whether or not you should reveal to sub-postmasters system faults with the Horizon system?
No, I was never given any guidance on that.
It was a matter of individual discretion for you?
Yes, but I and my colleagues certainly would say, I would hear them on the phone talking to postmasters, and I've seen quite a few peaks and so on where it says, spoke to the postmaster, explained it's a system problem. So that was being done.
Given that you have just said that you did it and you were aware of other colleagues in SSE sitting near or around you doing
Yeah.
it, how did that sit with what we discussed earlier, the post office's reluctance to reveal system errors, as you described it?
So that seemed to be the policy that they took on some of these bigger issues that were affecting more branches. But within SSC, we were never ever trying to hide the fact that there were system problems.
Can we turn, please, to poll 302 8898? This is Peak 0204765. You'll see that it's opened on the 25th of September 2010. The summary is having given the branch code and a message number, non-zero trading position on office rollover. And if we look at page 2, please, scroll down to the entry for 15/16/30. An entry by your colleague Cheryl Card. She says the problem occurred on the 15th of September when stock unit 02 rolled over. This was originally reported as per the KEL that we've read in call, and then a peak number is given. But for some reason the call was closed without being investigated. There's a known problem with the use of the cancel button during stock unit rollover. This is fully described in the other KEL that we looked at. A fix is currently being worked on.
Yes.
And then if we go over the page, we'll see from the second entry from the top, the call has been assigned to Mr. Jenkins on the 27th of September for advice on how to correct the branch accounts.
Apparently, yes.
And can you assist, why was this still occurring?
Because the fix hadn't been made yet.
And if we go back to page 1, if we look at the call status at the top, the priority status at the top, it's described 3 lines from the top on the right-hand side as non-critical. Yes?
Yes.
If a peak was given this status, C, non-critical, was that taken into account in a service level agreement with the post office when working out penalty clause thresholds of payments by Fujitsu to the post office?
I don't know.
Were you aware of a service level agreement which contained essentially liquidated damages thresholds depending on the status of calls as between A, B and C?
I don't think so. Only in as far as I said yesterday, I knew that some A priority financial calls did have to be done within certain lengths of time to resolve the financial side of it. But no, I mean, this was presumably raised as a C priority by the help desk unless anybody had changed the priority subsequently. That didn't mean that SSC wouldn't pick it up quickly and investigate it.
So the priority status didn't affect the priority with which the SSC dealt with a peak?
No, not necessarily.
What was the purpose of attributing a priority status?
If it was a priority, it would definitely be looked at quickly, but that doesn't mean that the rest Cs went to the back of the heap necessarily. Obviously, something with a non-zero trading position would be looked at fairly quickly, I would think. I can't see how quickly it was given to Cheryl, unless you scroll down.
I think she first picked it up on the 27th.
Right.
If we scroll to the second page,
Yeah.
I think her first entry is on the 27th. No, scroll down, please.
Yeah, that's so, well, yes.
There.
Yes, so, and without knowing which day of the week it is and so on, but yes, so it came into SSC on the 25th, and then the investigation started on the 27th by the look of it.
If we go to the third page, please, and look at the third entry down. The branch accounts will need to be corrected. Peak and a number has been sent to development for advice as to how to correct the accounts. And then, do you see there's some text copied in? And amongst other things, the severity there is given as critical.
That's the severity of the event. These two entries are from the NT events which are being monitored centrally.
Why might an NT event that has been attributed the severity of critical be assigned priority status C of non-critical?
Because when the call was raised, it wasn't actually raised for one of these events.
Would not the fact that this NT event had been recognised to be linked to the call that had been made cause a recategorisation of priority?
It might have been sensible for somebody to have increased the priority of this bug from C, but we can see from all the other documents and calls that were coming in with this problem, there were a lot of people working on it by now. It was not one little C priority call at the back of the heap with people at the help desk adding things to it and nobody looking at it. The investigation was well underway.
I'm going to skip over much of the correspondence, documents, emails from September, October and November 2010 concerning the bug and its revelation to the post office, because they mainly concern Mr. Jenkins' actions. But can we go please to a document from mid-November 2010, Fujitsu 0008 1214. This is a series of emails. Can we start, please, with the third page? I just look at the bottom of the second page to see who it's from and to. From Antonio Jamaz, a post office employee, the branch IT service manager. To Sarweed Salawu in Fujitsu. Did you know him or her?
He might have been Steve Parker's boss at that point.
Sorry, I missed that. He might
have been Steve Parker's boss at that point, but I'm not at all sure.
If we scroll up a little bit, we can see Mr. Salawu's sign-off block in his signature, so you can see what his role was.
Right, so service delivery manager. So I was wrong about him being Steve's boss.
Anyway, going back to the text of Mr. Jamab's email. I have a conference call on Monday with senior stakeholders within POL. I need a full update for receipts and payments. I need up-to-date spreadsheet of branches affected and what the discrepancy is. Up-to-date list of branches encounters yet to have fix. Any calls logged with HSD re the issue. A summary from Fujitsu stating why we have no other integrity issues with Horizon and why we couldn't see this issue. Sorry to drop this on you. In relation to the fourth of Mr. Jamab's requests or demands, would you agree that that's a reasonable question for a customer to ask their contractor?
That would be a difficult question to answer, possibly. I've no idea. I wasn't involved, as far as I'm aware, in this investigation at the time.
But would you agree, stepping back, that this is a reasonable reassurance for a customer to seek?
I think it's a reasonable reassurance for a customer to seek.
Asking, please tell us, Fujitsu, why we have got no other integrity issues with Horizon Part 1, Part 2. Why was it we couldn't see this issue? Can we go to scrolling up, please? Mr. Salawu forwards it to some others within Fujitsu. Can you help who they were, Mike Woolgar and Naina Lowther?
I think they were what's obviously called a service delivery manager at this point.
Second paragraph, I know Mike was running with this, but there should be information that can answer the queries. It's a good test of how effective our update process works. And then scrolling up still further, Mr. Woolgar emails Messrs. Simpkins and Jenkins. Are you able to provide answers from to the questions from POL yesterday? He will deal with the third one, and then go to page 1, please. Mr. Jenkins' reply, he adds Mark Wright in, who I think would have been your manager by then, your team leader.
My team leader, yeah.
Mr. Jenkins says, Mark, I think it is Mark from SSC that's been running with this rather than John. Attaches an email he sent to POL with an update yesterday. I think this addresses points 1 and 2. As for point 4, then that is probably down to me. In simple terms, I don't think we can make such a statement. You'll remember what the request was. Can Fujitsu tell us why we have no other integrity issues with Horizon, and why couldn't we see this issue? And he says, I don't think we can make such a statement. He continues, what we can do is check through what known integrity issues we have, and also make the more general statement that when integrity issues arrive, then they do leave a trail, enabling them to be identified and their scope to be ascertained. John, Mark, are you aware of any other integrity issues that we've not yet fixed? I can't think of any off the top of my head. At this time, would you have answered the question in the same way as Mr. Jenkins, that you couldn't say that there are no integrity issues with Horizon?
Yes, I don't think I think I would have answered it in the same way. I said earlier I thought it was a very difficult question to answer, and I go along with what he says.
And in relation to what else he said, would you agree that the best that could possibly be said was that there were in fact known integrity issues with Horizon?
Well, it's to check through what known integrity issues we have.
Yes.
Yes.
And that, would you agree that when an integrity issue shows itself, it leaves a trail?
Yes.
And so you would have answered this in the same way?
I think it was way above my pay grade to be answering that type of question.
So returning, thank you very much, that can come down. Returning to the issues then, it seems that significant action was taken in relation to the bug in September 2010, is that right?
As far as I know, I wasn't involved.
And you have, I think, answered my question already, that peaks have been raised from February 2010 onwards, and your answer was to the question, why wasn't action taken in relation to those peaks? They concerned a different issue.
I think it's highly likely that they concerned a different issue. We have not seen it, so I cannot say definitively either way.
But Mr. Jenkins appears to have been aware of this bug, the receipts and payments mismatch bug, which caused the Windows NT 902 events from May 2010.
He was aware of that there could be various causes of receipts and payments bugs. We haven't seen anything that links those two that he flagged with the same, with the receipts and payments particular issue caused by the Prev button.
And in relation to the 100 or so branches that you mentioned earlier,
I've no idea how many it was. It will be in, it's written down somewhere.
to your knowledge, what action was taken proactively to tell them of the existence of this bug?
I don't know.
Thank you. Can we move to the Calendar Square Falkirk bug? It might be a good opportunity to take a break and reconvene at 10 to 2, sir.
By all means. Yep, that's fine. So 10 to 2. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much.